What do 90% of homeless and runaway children, 85% of children with behavioral disorders, 71% of high school dropouts, 75% of youth in drug abuse centers, and 85% of all youth in prison have in common? They all come from fatherless homes. There are over 25 million kids right now growing up in a home without their dad. And for them, Father's Day is just another fatherless day. But it doesn't have to be this way. The numbers show that children with involved fathers have higher self-esteem, better grade point averages, and they grow up to become the most compassionate adults. Dads, we are vital. The role we play is world-changing. God has given us the ability to completely rewrite the future, not only for our sons and daughters, but for the millions of girls and boys who are right now living without a dad. Now is the time to step up. Our kids need us more than ever. The fatherless need us more than ever. There are kids in this building right now who need a man of God in their lives, a role model, a mentor, someone to say, "I'm proud of you," someone to have their back, someone to affirm them, someone to show the love of Christ to them. Not just anyone, not just a friend. They need a man. So to all the dads out there, reflecting Jesus to their kids, willing to stand up for the abandoned, and giving it all for their family, we say thank you. God is changing the world through you. Your impact will reach further than you can ever imagine. So be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. Let all that you do be done in love. Happy Father's Day.
Our first Halloween here at Davis Park, so 2 Halloweens ago, my family dressed up as characters from the movie Toy Story. Yeah. I was Woody, Corey was Jesse, Janice was Buzz Lightyear, and Riley was Little Bo Peep. Now, if you're not familiar with the movie Toy Story, if you've never seen the movie Toy Story before, it came out in 1995 and to rave reviews because it was the first completely, fully computer animated feature film. And it made hundreds of millions of dollars in the box office nationally and internationally. Tom Hanks was the voice for Woody. Tim Allen was the voice for Buzz Lightyear. And recently, I read a post online of a guy. Whenever I watch the movie with my kids, which I think we watched it last week, we have all 3 of them. There were 3 Toy Stories made. But whenever I watch the first Toy Story with them, a question keeps popping up in my mind. And that question is, where's Andy's dad? I don't know if that question pops up into your mind if you've seen that movie and you've watched it several times before, but that always pops in my mind. And I was online this past week and I came across a post and this guy had this certain take on his answer to that question of Andy's dad. And his take went something like this. He said, Andy is experiencing a fatherless home. And he offers abundant evidence that he gleans from the movie itself, such as, well, we never see the dad mentioned, or we never see him at all in the movie, and he's never mentioned. Number 2, he says, the mom's not wearing a wedding ring when she's carrying in one of the birthday presents for Andy's, 6th birthday, she's not wearing a wedding ring. And number 3, the family is downsizing from a larger house to a smaller house to save money. And he offers more evidence to that, but that's just a snippet of some of the evidence that he offers. But within this fatherless home that Andy is experiencing, this young boy, the toys ultimately assume in this movie the role of the father for Andy. The toys assume the role of the father for Andy in this movie, in Toy Story. Andy is Woody and Buzz's best friend. They go with him everywhere. Woody and Buzz are Andy's heroes. Every time we have a sneak peek into the imagination of Andy when he's playing with his toys, Woody and Buzz are the heroes who save the day and defeat evil Dr. Porkchop. And throughout each of the 3 movies, there's a crisis that happens that separates Woody and Buzz from Andy. And every single time, they try to do as much as they can do to reestablish that connection, to not be lost, and to maintain their relationship with Andy. Woody and Buzz do everything that they can do to not lose Andy. So, Andy's experience is not uncommon. In fact, Timothy's experience in the Bible is very, very similar, quite similar, as a matter of fact. Timothy is a hero of the early church, but let's not forget, as we read about the story of Timothy in Acts, and we read about the story of Timothy and Paul's letters to him later in the New Testament, let's not forget the Woody to Timothy's Andy. Paul stepped up and risked quite a lot, if not everything, in order to assume the role of a spiritual father to Timothy, like the toys for Andy. If you got a Bible, open it up. If you got an iPad, iPhone, Bible, open it up to Acts 16. We're going to read the first 5 verses. Acts 16, 1 through 5. I got my little medallion from Chance this morning, so it says winner, so I'm wearing it on my wrist because I got a big melon on my head and wouldn't fit around it. So Acts 16, 1 through 5. It says this: right after that big Jerusalem council that they had in Jerusalem to determine who's can be really saved, do Gentiles need to be circumcised in order to become a follower of the Messiah, Jesus Christ, or not, this story happens. And it says in verse 1, Paul came also to Derbe and to Lystra, and a disciple was there named Timothy, the son of a Jewish woman who was a believer. But his father was a Greek. And he was well spoken of by the brethren who were in Lystra and Iconium. Paul wanted this man to go with him, and he took him and circumcised him because of the Jews who were in those parts, for they all knew that his father was a Greek. Now while they were passing through the cities, they were delivering the decrees which had been decided upon by the apostles and elders who were in Jerusalem for them to observe. So the churches were being strengthened in the faith and were increasing in number daily. Let me kind of give you a little big picture of what's going on here as we approach this story in the first 5 verses of Acts 16. So Paul and Silas and a group of men, after that decision is made and that decree is written in the Jerusalem church about Gentiles not needing to be circumcised and so forth in order to become a Christian, they take that message to the church in Antioch, which is north of Jerusalem in Syria. And they stay there a while, and then Paul and Barnabas are both like, you know what? Let's go back to the churches that we visited on our first missionary journey and encourage them and take these same decrees and decisions that the elders and apostles made in Jerusalem to them and encourage them. And so Paul and Barnabas ended up splitting up because of a disagreement. But Paul took Silas, a member of the church of Jerusalem, with him, and they went north. They went north to the rest of Syria, and they entered into the region of Cilicia in southeastern Asia Minor, Paul's home region. And they continued on from there, probably visiting his hometown, and they traveled through the Cilician gates and went to some of the same cities that we read about in Acts in the first missionary journey: Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe. And they came across, it just so happened, there's a word in the Greek where when it says Paul came to the city of Lystra, it says, behold. Lo and behold, to his surprise, by providential surprise, he found this particular certain young disciple named Timothy. But there was an issue with Timothy's family that was complicated because, you see, Paul wanted to bring Timothy into his mission team to continue on with him because he saw something in Timothy that he thought had potential. But before Paul could do that, there was an issue that needed to be resolved. And that issue resolved around what we read about in those few verses in Acts 16, 1 through 5, in Timothy's family, in Timothy's parents. So what did that involve? It involved a Jewish mother who was a believer, who was a Christian. She became a Christian along with Timothy's grandmother, Lois. His mother's name was Eunice. We read about that in 1st and 2nd Timothy. They became Christians on the first missionary journey, and they were of Jewish ethnicity. but his father was a Greek. In essence, what Luke is really saying, but his father was a heathen pagan, a Greek. And he wasn't a believer. He didn't follow the Jewish God. He wasn't very spiritual at all. You could say that. So Timothy's father was a heathen Greek, and he didn't convert to Judaism or Christianity. And so this marriage that we read about between a Jewish woman and a Greek man, it's complicated. You know, in the Old Testament, as we read through the Old Testament, didn't God say, don't do that? He said, Israelites, don't marry non-Israelites because that's going to cause some problems. But for Jews who lived away from Jerusalem, for Jews who lived away from Palestine, in what is referred to as the diaspora, for Jews who lived far away from Jerusalem and Palestine, the segregation, the separation between Jew and Gentile was a little bit looser. So a marriage between a Jewish woman and a Greek man was unusual, but not unheard of. But there was one particular interesting thing about that kind of marriage. It was considered non-legal. A Jewish woman marrying a Greek man was considered a non-legal marriage. But this Greek father allowed his wife, Eunice, and her mother, Lois, to raise up Timothy according to the Jewish faith. As we read about in 1 Timothy, they taught him the Scriptures as he was growing up. They taught him in the way of the Hebrew God, of the Hebrew Scriptures. And so he was very knowledgeable about that. He was a faithful Jew as well, Timothy was as a child. But the father didn't allow Timothy to do one particular thing that was very, very significant, and it became an issue for Paul in wanting to bring Timothy on in his mission team, and that was the father did not allow Timothy to be circumcised. Circumcision was a very big deal to Jews at this time. It was the number one thing to show that, hey, I'm a law-abiding, Torah-observant Jew. But to Gentiles and to Greeks and to Romans, it was disgusting, it was gross, it was mutilation of the flesh, and it became to them something that they scorned because all it became to them was something that, for the Jews, just said, we're the Jews and you're not, you can't be a part of us. And so for a Greek, for a Roman, for a Gentile, it was just something that they scorned because all you're doing is communicating to me that you're better than me. And so maybe Timothy's father was thinking, I don't want my child to have to go through that with my side of the family, for them to think about him that way and being circumcised. I don't know what. But Timothy, the father, did not allow Timothy to be circumcised because the father generally determined in this type of culture, that day and age in the first century, what the religion of the child should be. But he allowed his wife and grandmother to teach and to spiritually nurture Timothy in the Jewish faith, but he did not allow him to be circumcised. So that created an issue. But by the time that Paul came around in the second missionary journey, something had changed. By this point, the verses in Acts 16, 1 through 5, kind of lead us to think that the home for Timothy now was a fatherless home, that his father was somehow out of the picture. Whether he had deceased or what, we don't know. But it seems from what we're told and what we see that Timothy's father was not in the picture anymore, and it was a fatherless home. In the movie Toy Story 2, Woody is confronted with a decision to make. A guy steals Woody out of a garage sale, that's right. And he wants to sell Woody to a Japanese buyer for thousands and thousands of dollars. And so Woody is confronted with a situation and a decision to be sold to this guy in Japan and go into a museum and to live the high life and easy life and comfort and never be at risk of being broken as a result of being played with and then thrown away. So that's his decision, either to go to Japan and to live a life of comfort and ease and a life that's easy in a museum, or to be risk being broken by being played with and eventually thrown away as a toy. And when he's confronted finally, when it comes to the climax and he makes a final decision, Stinky Pete's trying to make him to come with him to Japan to go to the museum. But Woody says this. He says, I can't stop Andy from growing up, but I wouldn't miss it for the world. I can't stop Andy from growing up, but I wouldn't miss it for the world. I want to thank you this morning, dads, who say the very same thing to their own sons, to their own children who are in their lives. Who do the same thing as Woody did, who played the hero for Andy's life, who said, I can't stop him from growing up, but I wouldn't miss it for the world. I want to say thank you for doing that this morning, all of you dads in the audience. What about Timothy? Timothy's situation as a result of his parents' marriage, a Jewish mother and a Greek father, he was put in a kind of a predicament. So he was, in essence, you would say, pejoratively, a half-breed. He was considered a Jew and not a Gentile because back then your ethnicity was determined by the mother and not the father. So he was considered in the eyes of everybody around him and in his community, in his Jewish community and the Gentile Greek community, he was considered to be a Jew. And so there was a problem. He was a Jew, but he wasn't circumcised. And so the perception of Timothy was, yeah, you're a Jew, but you're falling away. You're an apostate. You're an outsider. You're not fully involved in this community. You're not good enough. You haven't, become all in the Jewish faith. That's how the Jews around him viewed him. And so he was kind of stigmatized. He was an outsider both to his Jewish counterparts, his Jewish family, his Jewish community, and he was also kind of an outsider to the Greek community as well as a result of his current situation. Here's something that's interesting. One Jewish rabbi said of children born of a Jewish mother and a Greek father, he had to say this. He had to say, those born to a Jewish mother and a Greek father are encouraged to conceal their half-Gentile parentage and go abroad where the Gentile fathers will not be known. So pretty much you got to move away to a particular region of the world where your parentage will not be known. That's the only thing that you can do because your situation is that bad. But something changed when Paul got back there on his second missionary journey. Time had passed. His father was no longer part of the picture. Timothy was living in a fatherless home, and Timothy had come to faith in Jesus Christ as a result of Paul's first missionary journey along with his mother and grandmother. And Paul, finding him, lo and behold, by his surprise, a certain disciple, this young man Timothy, when he came to Lystra, he wanted to take him and make him a part of his missionary team. But he had to do one thing first. He had to circumcise him. But why? Paul's reasoning was completely for one reason alone, and that was the mission of God. It was the mission of God because what was Paul's missionary strategy? It was to go to the Jew first and then to the Gentile. And so if he had a member of his team that was a Jew and yet was uncircumcised, it would have been a total barrier to evangelism wherever he went. And so that was the main reason for why Paul made this decision. And it was the main reason why Timothy let him make the decision, because it wasn't just Paul, because we talked about this in class, Timothy risked something as well. He gave up something. And he was willing to go through with that as a teenager or some kid in his 20s because of the mission of God. Both Paul and Timothy made that missional decision to not be a barrier to the gospel wherever they went. But there was another thing that Paul did. And this is pretty significant. We don't read about it in the book of Acts in those 5 verses that we read in Acts chapter 16. But we read about it in his 2 letters written to Timothy, 1st and 2nd Timothy. Before they set off together as a team, where they would eventually go to Troas at the western coast of Asia Minor and eventually into Europe, begin their mission work in Europe, in Macedonia and Greece, Paul and the elders, especially Paul, he says, laid his hands on Timothy. He laid his hands on him and bestowed upon him a spiritual gift. It says there in 1 Timothy, it says this. Paul says in 1 Timothy 1:6, fan into flame, or 2 Timothy 1:6, fan into flame the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands. Typically in Jewish tradition that we see in the Old Testament, who is one to lay their hands on a younger person to bestow blessing or a curse? It's a father. And so, in essence, Paul does what a father would do to Timothy. He laid his hands on him and spoke into his life blessing and purpose, and through the power of the Holy Spirit bestowed upon him a spiritual gift. And that he says, fan into flame the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands. So Paul did what a father would do to Timothy. And we don't get to see this dynamic relationship that began at this moment in Acts 16 throughout the rest of Acts. But we kind of see snippets of it throughout Paul's letters, especially 1st and 2nd Timothy. And this is what Paul had to say about Timothy himself in some of those letters in the rest of the New Testament. Paul called Timothy, my beloved and faithful son in the Lord. He called him my true child in the faith. He called him, and he talked about their relationship and how they served together as a son with a father, as he served with me in the gospel in Philippians 2:22. So that father-son spiritual relationship that they had the rest of their lives began here in Acts 16, verses 1 through 5. Timothy had nothing to lose, you could say, by joining up with Paul wanting to bring him on as part of his missionary team. But Paul, think about it, had a lot to lose. This was a very big risk in bringing Timothy on board and possibly damaging his influence in the Jewish community and Gentile community in terms of spreading the gospel to those people wherever he went. Timothy had nothing to lose. Paul had everything to lose, yet Paul took that risk and brought on Timothy and became and assumed the role of Timothy's father in the faith. There's in the movie Toy Story 3, what happens is that at the end of the movie, Andy's about to go off to college. And before that happens, right before that happens, Woody, in essence, influences Andy to pass on Woody and the rest of the toys to another young girl so that the toys would be taken care of as this young girl would grow up and become older as well. So in essence, what Woody did was that he paid it forward. Woody influenced Andy in their relationship to the point where Andy paid it forward and did the same thing for another young girl, if you will. He gave that young girl another, essence through Woody and Buzz, a father figure in her life. This morning I want to say thank you to the fathers here in this audience who, like Paul, put the mission of God first by raising up children, sons and daughters who themselves put the mission of God first in their lives and pay it forward by doing for others what their fathers have done for them. I want to say thank you. Main point this morning is, who is your Andy? Who's your Andy? I woke up this morning and I got out of bed and I walked into on my way to the kitchen. Corey had the night before set up my Father's Day gifts onto the kitchen table. She gave me a nice brand new hiking blue backpack. Avenger, I think, is the brand name. She gave me these headlamps that I could use to hike with, and they're become especially helpful when we go on our senior hike in Yosemite later this month with some of our seniors. She gave me a card. She gave me one other thing as well. She gave me this. She gave me this poem, and it has on here Chance's footprint and Riley's footprint. And the poem is called "Walk With Me, Daddy." And it goes like this: walk alongside me, Daddy. And hold my little hand. I have so many things to learn that I don't yet understand. Teach me things to keep me safe from dangers every day. Show me how to do my best at home, at school, at play. Every child needs a gentle hand to guide them as they grow. So walk alongside me, Daddy. We have a long way to go. Who's your Andy? If you have kids at home, that's your Andy. If you don't have kids at home, there are kids here who need their Woody and Buzz and Jesse. Will you walk beside your Andy for the sake of the mission of God? So that ultimately that will empower them, as we talked about the last time I was up here, to do that much better of a job of the Great Commission, which we're all called to do. Will you walk with your Andy for the sake of the mission of God, like Paul did for Timothy, and became and assumed the role of his father, a young boy from a fatherless home? Because revolutionary parents understand this one thing that George Barna says. As a revolutionary parent, they understand that their primary job in life, their primary goal in life is not, as a father, as a mother, as a parent, is not to make a living, is not their career, it's not to put clothes on the back, it's not to put food in the mouth, it's not to put a roof over the head. The career and all that is just means of doing one main thing, and that is raising a spiritual champion. That's your goal. That's the goal of a revolutionary parent. How can you do that? Well, there's two next steps that I can talk to you about this morning. One of them is, one of the things that's incorporated with Orange is called the parent cue. Every Sunday when your child comes out of class on Sunday morning, they're handed a parent cue to give to you as their parents. And that's supposed to empower you as fathers, you as mothers, to take what we do here to do at home, because you have so many more hours in the day, in the year, and in their lives to influence them than we do here at church. 40 hours on average we have with a child here at church. We are blown away by how many hours that is less than how many hours you have, which is 3,000 per year waking hours of influence in your child's life. So we want to empower you through Orange and that parent cue to take that, not to reinvent the wheel, but to give you a tool to do at home what they get here at church, so that you become the primary spiritual coaches and mentors and leaders in your child's life. There's also Church in the Park. And one of the greatest things that you can give your child is to serve with them as part of the mission of God, and show them that, hey, this, like Paul and Timothy, this is what's most important. You can come with us to Church in the Park, where you can encounter some people who are in desperate need of food, of clothing, of shelter, of Jesus. And you, like Paul, can make a lasting and eternal impact in the life of a child, in the life of your Andy. So come with us June 29th, and you can do that. You can help us do that. You know, the second missionary journey, all it started out to be was, let's just go back to the cities that we went to the first time around and encourage them. But what did God do with that? God surprised Paul with his Andy, Timothy. And look at what happened. He says, hey, Timothy, come join us. Yeah, we're going to circumcise you. Great. Now we're going to hike 300 miles to Troas. We're not really sure where we're going to go, but we're going to go somewhere. But what happened is that team that formed as a result of God's work in Paul's life, and how Paul assumed the role of the father in Timothy's life, that team that formed now was Paul, Timothy, Jew, half Gentile, Silas, a member of the church in Jerusalem, a Jewish Christian, and then finally who joined up with them in Troas was what? Who? Luke, the Gentile doctor. That's quite a missionary team if I ever heard of one. That could reach some people. And so what started out as just a simple little, let's go encourage some churches in Asia Minor, became something much more. It definitely became something much more in Timothy's life. It can become so much more to you who take the risk and risk a whole lot to just speak into the life of a child, to become and assume the role of their spiritual father, spiritual mother, spiritual brother, sister, you name it. There's Andys in here that need you. We need you to pursue the hearts of the children and your Andys here this morning as we follow a God who turns the hearts of the fathers to their children, as Malachi says, and the hearts of the children to their fathers. So, Buzzes, Woodies, Jessies, who's your Andy? Who's your Andy? If there's anything you need here this morning, we'd be more than happy to help you in any way possible to be a blessing to your life here on this Father's Day. Whatever it may be, we'll have ministers and elders here invite you as we stand forward and as we stand and as we sing.